Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Lisa Martin with Silver Spring Town Center, and we're so happy to have you joining us for Object Performance in African American Visual Art with Dr. Paulette Richards. And we're so happy to have such a rich array of programming as we celebrate Black History Month. Paulette was on our program last night, African American Culinary Traditions, and we had a great chat. And you can already see the YouTube is already up on Silver Spring Town Center's YouTube page if you would like to watch that. Other events we have in celebration of Black History Month. Next week, we have our Sparkle program with which is co-hosted with the Silver Spring Village. And we have Marshall Thurgood as the topic. I can't recall the title, but it's about Marshall Thurgood and the Supreme Court Justice. And then we have our annual Black Voices Through Poetry, hosted by poet Brenda Bunting on Friday, February 16th at 7 o'clock on Zoom. We also have an in-person event, and it's with Freed, the Freed stands for Female Reenactors of Distinction, and they do the Civil War heroines reenactments, and they're excellent. And they will be performing at 5:15 this Friday afternoon at the Silver Spring Civic Building, where we are celebrating our annual Around the World Bazaar, and we have an eclectic mix of international arts and entertainment, including 2 performance areas. There's going to be a Bollywood wedding dance activity, a Brazilian Latin carnival dance party, a comedy show, and an international potluck if you're into that and would like to bring a dish to share. All kinds of fun stuff, and there will be arts and craft exhibitors and hands-on art activities and more, and it's all free. All of our events are made possible with generous support from Montgomery County, United Therapeutics, the Arts and Humanities of Montgomery County, Maryland State Arts, Montgomery College, and many others. And now let's get started with the program, Object Performance in African American Visual Art, hosted by our speaker, Dr. Paulette Richards. And I am going to, I'm just spotlighting here so I can see what I'm doing. I'd like to introduce our presenter, independent researcher, Dr. Paulette Richards. Has taught at Georgetown University, Tulane University, and Georgia Tech. During her time as a 2013-2014 Fulbright Scholar in Senegal, she began to focus her multidisciplinary interest in African diaspora cultural studies on puppets, masks, and performing objects. Co-curator of the Living Objects African American Puppetry exhibit at the University of Connecticut's Ballard Institute and Museum with Dr. John Bell. She holds a PhD from the University of Virginia. More recently, she curated a traveling exhibit on the Wonderland Puppet Theater. Her book, Object Performance in the Black Atlantic, is available from Routledge Publishing. And now I'd like to welcome Dr. Paulette Richards. Welcome.
Hi, Lisa.
Paulette.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. We're so happy to have you. I know it's an interesting topic.
Yes, thank everyone for coming out. What I'm going to be presenting today is one chapter from my book. And so in the interest of time, I'm going to dive in and try to keep this as compressed as possible. But I have a little intro, then I'm going to show a diagram that will orient us a bit in the topic, and then I'm going to talk about 4 visual artists, African American visual artists who create performing objects as well as more traditional fine art objects. So in his groundbreaking study of African art in motion, Robert Farris Thompson signaled the importance of dance in African aesthetics and asserted that African visual art was meant to be experienced in motion. It is therefore not surprising that some African American visual artists have felt the need to animate their works as part of a performance complex that encompasses music, dance, and storytelling in the service of building community and educating youth. While the visual artists profiled in this presentation all pursued advanced training in Western art techniques, their aesthetics also drew heavily on the embodied knowledge of craft skills handed down from enslaved African ancestors and from deliberate study and reclamation of African art. Ashley Bryan, Faith Ringgold, and Nick Cave sought to fill what they saw as a void in the representation of African American experience. Kara Walker grapples with the grotesque specter of blackface minstrelsy that filled the void during the period when African Americans lacked power to represent themselves. So let me first present this diagram that I used to set up the whole book. So I looked at the history of object performance in Africa. I'm talking about masks, I'm talking about puppets, and other objects that are employed as characters in a narrative with the power to affect the outcome, agency to affect the outcome. And I saw that they serve three main functions. One is spiritual observance in ritual practice. One is moral education, which was accomplished primarily through storytelling. And one is community building, which we often see in what is called masquerade, or a term that I prefer, which is spectacle drama. So the intersection of those three functions was public ceremony, which also marked the convergence of the material and the spirit realm, since the masks that people performed with usually represented otherworldly figures, and might be a locus of spiritual energy. So within this complex, we have, under storytelling, we see that people use music, dance, and spoken word art to convey the message, whether they had objects or not. Within spiritual observance, people would pray and sing, and as that got translated to the North American milieu, we also see rituals like the ring shout. And once again, those may or may not use objects. What I found in the course of my research is that object performance in Africa, and as it's coming to flourish again in the United States, is a powerful community building activity. And that Africans in the Americas continued that function even when they did not have the opportunity to make objects. So in the course of my research, I hit a brick wall very early on, because there was the period of enslavement when, for a variety of reasons, African Americans did not have the capacity to make the kinds of performing objects that they would have used in the societies they came from in Africa. And that could be because they couldn't access the materials. It could be because they didn't have enough leisure time to make those things for themselves. Or it was also that they were prohibited from making things that the slaveholders saw as heathen idols. And then on top of that, as I said, object performance is a powerful community building activity. And so to mount the kind of spectacle dramas that people would have participated in Africa requires a whole social network to put that together. Those social networks were deliberately destroyed under slavery, and efforts to reconstitute them were strictly controlled. So these are some of the reasons that African Americans didn't really begin to reconnect with object performance until after emancipation, and more particularly in the 20th century, when more people had opportunity to further their formal education, because without a folk tradition of object performance, and here I'm talking about the kinds of folk puppet heroes that we see in other parts of the world, like Punch and Judy, or Dom Cristobal in Spain, or Petrushka in Russia, Guignol in France, etc. We didn't have anything like that in the United States, so people didn't have opportunities to see puppet shows or learn about them until it was reintroduced in their schooling. So for African Americans, that access to education doesn't become widespread until into the 20th century. But the artists we're going to talk about today, they did have opportunities to gain a Western art education. And so I'm going to start with Ashley Bryan, who many of you may be familiar with. And here he is with two of the puppets that he created. So I think it's significant that Ashley Bryan's parents were born in Antigua. They immigrated to New York City after World War I and settled in the Bronx, where they raised 6 children. Their second child, that's Ashley Bryan, was born in 1923. And although his family had very limited means during his formative years, he remembered, and I'm quoting, "My mother made our apartment so beautiful that everyone enjoyed visiting. She loved flowers, and wherever there was light, there was a plant. Where there was no light, she made colorful crepe paper flowers to brighten the shadowed areas." So here's a picture of Bryan's workshop. As a young person, he got to take art and music lessons through WPA programs. That's the Works Progress Administration, which was a federal program during the Great Depression. And then his high school teachers saw his talent and encouraged him to apply to art schools, but he was rejected from several of them because of his race. So finally, they suggested that he try Cooper Union because they had a blind admissions process. So he was accepted on the strength of his portfolio. And since Cooper Union did not charge tuition, he was able to pursue his dream despite his economic disadvantages. When he was 19, however, Bryan was drafted and shipped overseas to fight in World War II. Still, he kept a sketchbook with him at all times, even storing it in his gas mask. And so he was able to sketch throughout his tour of duty. And decades later, he would use this material as the basis for a picture book, Infinite Hope, a Black artist's journey from World War II to peace. After the war, he returned to complete his Bachelor of Fine Arts at Cooper Union, and then he used his GI benefits to study philosophy at Columbia University. GI benefits also allowed him to further his art education at the University of Marseille, and then he subsequently spent 2 years studying at the University of Freiburg on a Fulbright scholarship. So these are opportunities that had not been widely available to African American artists before that time. Bryan found work teaching at various colleges, including Queens College, Philadelphia College of Art, and ultimately Dartmouth College, where he worked until his retirement in 1988. While he was studying at the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture on a summer scholarship, Bryan discovered Cranberry Island off the coast of Maine, and he would retreat there to work on his art as often as he could. Later in life, when he had the means, he purchased a home and studio space on the island. Bryan never married or had children of his own, but he assumed the responsibility of providing for his sister Emmeline's 5 children after her divorce. She lived in the home that their parents had been able to purchase, while Bryan maintained his own household. But he was an active presence in the lives of his nieces and nephews. His relationships with them gave him insights into children's perspectives on the world and motivated him to tell stories that would inspire and uplift them. He therefore connected his visual art with storytelling as a mode of moral education for youth. So that links back to the diagram that I showed you in the beginning. He's using his art for this traditional purpose of helping young people become full human beings and useful members of the community. In 1971, Bryan published The Ox of the Wonderful Horns and Other African Folk Tales. This was the first of many illustrated children's books that drew on African American history and culture to show all children that Black is beautiful and to help them appreciate the joy and beauty in this wonderful world. And that's the title of another one of his books. Let me just move that down. He frequently did presentations in schools where he took his storytelling from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions by performing his stories with puppets. In his walks along the beach on Cranberry Island, he would gather interesting shells, driftwood, sea glass, and other detritus. Then he created dozens of found object puppets with these materials to help act out the stories. And so this book is a collection of all of the puppets that he made in this way. In his 2014 book, Ashley Bryan's Puppets, Make Something from Everything represents more than 30 of these figures and celebrates each character with a poem. Bryan's books for children have won multiple Coretta Scott King Awards and other honors. Okay, so that's Ashley Bryan. The next artist I'm introducing is Faith Ringgold. Like Ashley Bryan, Faith Ringgold grew up in New York City, the youngest of 3 children born to Andrew Lewis Jones and Willie Edel Jones, who had moved to the city from Florida as part of the Great Migration. As a small child, Ringgold suffered from life-threatening asthma attacks. She was not able to enter school for kindergarten and missed most of the 1st grade because her health was too precarious. So her mother prepared a special diet for her and encouraged her to spend the many hours she was confined to bed using art materials to create her own imaginary worlds. Ringgold's parents separated when she was 2 or 3, but her father remained a strong presence in her life. He continued to support the household so that her mother could devote most of her time to caring for the children. He would also take Ringgold to his favorite watering holes in Harlem, where he would encourage her to practice her reading skills by reading the signs on the walls and the labels on the bottles. Once she was able to enroll in school, Ringgold showed a talent for art. After graduating from high school, she tried to matriculate in the fine arts program at City College in 1948, but was forced into the arts education program instead because women were not expected to become fine artists at the time. Ringgold did indeed marry in 1950 during her junior year and had 2 daughters by 1953. Her husband, Earl Wallace, was a jazz musician who unfortunately succumbed to heroin addiction. Ringgold left him in 1954, completed her degree the following year, and secured a position as an art teacher in the New York public school system. In the summer of 1961, she took her mother and children to France and Italy so that she could study masterworks in European museums. And I think this is the thing that blows my mind and is the thing I find most admirable about Faith Ringgold, just that she had the imagination to envision not only traveling to Europe by herself, but bringing her family with her as a single Black woman in the 1950s. So I don't know how she funded that, but it was a very fruitful trip for her in that, unfortunately, news of her brother's death cut the trip short, but she used her European sojourn in later artworks, such as the French collection Story Quilt series. Ringgold started as a painter, but as she matured, she became more interested in mixed media pieces. The civil rights movement and the women's movement had a profound impact on her work. During the civil rights movement, she developed a new black light technique for painting in oils that recalibrated the traditional palette towards the skin tones of dark complexioned subjects. Frustrated with limited opportunities for women artists to gain exhibitions in major museums and galleries, she became active in protests, seeking space for more artists of color and more women in shows mounted by institutions that received public funding. Over time, her continuous efforts to network with other women artists of color produced results much like traditional quilting bees, where collective effort accomplished more than any one party could have achieved alone. So there's a strong community building component in Ringgold's career. Thus, her activism helped get Barbara Chase Ribaud and Betty Saar into the Whitney Annual in 1970, and probably helped pave the way for Alma Thomas's solo show at the Whitney in 1972. Fittingly, as she developed her vision of women's art, Ringgold began to draw on materials and techniques that had traditionally been the purview of women, but were dismissed as craft rather than fine art. And so as you can see in the image here, this is a mask that she created, but it is a soft sculpture, not a traditional wood-carved mask. In her famous 1972 essay, In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, Alice Walker asks, what did it mean for a Black woman to be an artist in our grandmother's time, in our great-grandmother's day? It is a question with an answer cruel enough to stop the blood. Walker recognizes her mother's flower gardens as an outlet for her artistic sensibilities. Similarly, Ringgold's mother, Willie Posey, was a fashion designer who regularly staged runway shows featuring her creations in Harlem, just as Alma Thomas's mother created fashions for stylish women in Washington, D.C. Posey passed down the quilting skills she had learned from her mother, Ida Bingham Posey, who supported herself as a dressmaker after her husband passed away in 1910. And Ida Bingham Posey had also learned from her grandmother, Betsy Bingham, who taught her to make hand-pieced quilts. Ringgold regularly collaborated with her mother, so it was natural for her to draw on the embodied knowledge of textile art skills handed down through slavery to create quilts, dolls, and other fiber art pieces as fine art objects. And so this is in my research when I was looking for a lineage that African-American object performers draw on, most of them are pulling from this embodied knowledge of fiber arts skills. By the late 1960s, there was a thriving market for African-style clothes in Harlem, so Willie Posey went to Ghana and Nigeria in 1972, looking for inspiration in the textiles and fashions of the mother continent. The fabrics and stories she brought back further influenced the direction of Ringgold's work. Ringgold felt drawn in particular to African masks. She recognized that the costume was an integral part of the mask. It made the mask a more complete spiritual and sculptural identity and stressed the fact that masks are not just objects to hang on a wall, but are also to be worn. And that's a quote from one of her books. In 1975, Ringgold sculpted foam rubber portrait masks representing Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Adam Clayton Powell Jr. She designed them like African helmet masks, so masks that fit on top of the head to extend the wearer's height and enhance the character's greatness. She first enlisted her daughters to perform her mask characters for the camera so that she could make slides for her lecture presentations. But the bicentennial celebrations provoked her to stage her first live performance with masks, and it was called The Wake and Resurrection of the Bicentennial Negro. Most of the performers in Wake were dancers because mask work required performers who could move well on stage. The performers found that the masks inspired them to say things they had never planned to say. And anybody who works with puppets knows that they have this habit of mouthing off script. The combining music, story, and live performance was particularly satisfying, as Ringgold notes, quote, paintings, no matter how skillfully done, rarely get applause. Since her mother had such a positive experience traveling in Africa, Ringgold eagerly spent 2 months traveling through Nigeria and Ghana in 1976. She was invited back to Nigeria in 1977 for the Festival of Black and African Art and Culture in Lagos, Nigeria. The new African mask series she created on her return were the first of her sculptural pieces to sell. Like Ashley Bryan, Faith Ringgold found she had a keen desire to tell stories through her art. Frustrated in her attempts to publish an autobiography, she began making story quilts painted with images and text. Throughout my book, there are many references to quilts as repositories of stories, as well as a site where African Americans pass down these fiber art skills and this aesthetic sensibility that shows up in the puppets. So Faith Ringgold is one of the best examples. She found that presenting her work on the college lecture circuit was a way to develop an audience when the barriers for women artists to gain entrance into gallery representation and exhibits and major museums were still high. She began to create installations and performances as part of her presentations, and thus earned a name as a performance artist, along with increasing respect for her visual artwork. So in the time period when she was creating these installations and performances, this was something rather new in the fine art world. But if we go back to the diagram that I showed in the beginning, she is well centered in the tradition of African art in motion. One of Ringgold's most successful performance artworks incorporated story quilts and masks to tell the story of change, Faith Ringgold's 100-pound weight loss. Definitely something to celebrate. When Andrea Cascardi, editor of children's books at Crown Books, saw a poster of Ringgold's Tar Beach story quilt, she encouraged Ringgold to use it as the basis of a children's book. Tar Beach recounts the adventures of an 8-year-old girl named Cassie. Ringgold developed the story based on her own childhood memories of growing up in Harlem. Quote, on hot summer evenings, we would go up to the tar-covered roof of the building, which was known as Tar Beach. We would take blankets, a jug of lemonade, some sandwiches, and a watermelon. While the adults would play cards or talk, we kids got a chance to stay up late, snack, and look at the stars until we fell asleep. Tar Beach won a Caldecott Honor, the Coretta Scott King Award, and the New York Times Best Children's Illustrated Book Award for 1991. Thus, Ringgold found a new mode of artistic expression as a children's book author. Eventually, she did get major gallery shows and the critical attention she wanted. She had a 20-year retrospective at the Studio Museum in Harlem, a 25-year retrospective that toured 13 museums, and was appointed to a senior professorship at the University of California at San Diego. Part of what elevated the value of Ringgold's work was the broad audience she had developed through her children's books. When the Guggenheim Museum acquired her Tar Beach story quilt, the curators were amazed that children would come with their families and ask to see it. So for the aspiring artists among us, that is a good inspiration for how to build an audience that really appreciates your work. Okay. So the next artist I will be speaking about is Nick Cave, who was born in 1959 and grew up in Missouri in a family of 7 boys. He learned to collect discards and to sew at an early age because he was down in the pecking order and he wanted to be able to personalize the hand-me-down clothes he was forced to wear. This skill led him to study costume design at the Kansas City Art Institute. He subsequently earned his MFA from Cranbrook Academy of Art at Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, and joined the faculty of the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Cave seized opportunities to study at the Alvin Ailey School during his student years, and his dance training had a profound influence on the moving sculptures that would become his artistic signature. In an essay titled "Out of a Riot Comes a Dream: The Public and Private Iterations of Nick Cave," Nato Thompson places Cave's work in the context of public spectacles that arise from collective trauma, such as the evolution of gay pride celebrations from marches commemorating the 1969 Stonewall riots. Cave has often told the story of how the 1992 uprising that followed the acquittal of the police officers who savagely beat Rodney King inspired him to create his first sound suit. He was walking in the park when he noticed some twigs and conceived of making a suit with them as a kind of spiritual armor. Once the suit was complete, the sound that the twigs made as he moved in it inspired him to name this new genre of sculpture sound suits. Cave went on to create sound suits from a wide variety of materials, incorporating all kinds of found objects. Describing his sound suits as objects for the body, Cave's process emphasizes hand craftsmanship, celebrating the skills transmitted as embodied knowledge through generations of enslavement and oppression. While he has worked in the field of fashion design, he finds that distinctions between fine art and fashion, or between fine art and craft, are not useful. Despite the intricacy of his sculptures, he does not start with sketches. Instead, he draws inspiration from his collections of materials and begins by designing a structure that can support them. Then he places objects on the structure, moving and adding or removing items until he is satisfied with the composition. The suit is finished when, as he says, it has breath. And this is very important because puppeteers, what we do is give breath to objects. So the first thing we do is to give the illusion of breath to the object. So this suit we can definitely claim as a performing object. When preparing for performances, Cave asks his dancers to sit with the suit and look at it closely before putting it on and beginning to move in it. Only in this way will they connect with the full energy the suit expresses. He describes putting on the sound suit as a transformation in which the performer lets go of their own ego. This transformation is therefore very similar to the spiritual transformation that traditional African mask dancers experience. So if we go to the center of that Venn diagram that I showed in the beginning, which I said the spectacle drama performance with the mask as an intersection of the spirit and material world, and Cave's sound suits function in exactly that way. Cave prefers working in collaboration with local groups to bring the art out of the gallery and into public spaces. So he has staged performances with dancers animating the suits in spectacles commissioned by museums, universities, and other public institutions like the New York Transit System as community engagement projects. In this way, his work serves the community building function that was a principal motivation for African spectacle drama. While his work usually does not incorporate a specific political message, the act of a Black man occupying public space with his creative vision transforms not only the performers, but also the space itself. Nato Thompson draws on Michael Bakhtin's discussion of the carnivalesque to describe Cave's sound suit performances as spaces where people from all walks of life can mingle freely and where the suits obscure the size, color, gender, and ethnicity of the performers, where eccentric behavior and the reversal of traditional hierarchies open space to imagine true liberation, where seemingly contradictory terms can coexist in carnivalistic misalliances amidst the cornucopia of objects assembled in the suits, and where normative distinctions between the sacred and the profane are obliterated in sacrilegious abandon. For example, Cave suits have commented on consumerist excess since they are often made of discarded objects. In recent years, Cave has worked Black memorabilia objects into sound suits that reflect on racist consumerism. While there are compelling reasons to discard such objects, his sound suits highlight and interrogate the reasons why they continue to be mass produced. Okay, so I think I can wrap up in about 10 minutes, and then that'll give us some time for questions before the end of the hour. So just to note, within this sound suit, we have a number of blackface kind of minstrel caricature figures. And the next artist, Kara Walker, works even more explicitly within and against that tradition. So earlier generations might consider that Kara Walker grew up in the Promised Land, having been born in 1969 after the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and the 1968 Fair Housing Act putatively demolished de jure segregation. Her father was an art professor, and she spent her formative years in California, where she attended ethnically diverse schools and lived in integrated neighborhoods. Then, when she was 13, her father accepted a position at Georgia State University here in Atlanta, where I live, and the family moved to Stone Mountain in the suburbs of Atlanta. At that time, the Ku Klux Klan was still holding rallies at Stone Mountain Park, where William Joseph Simmons had re-established the organization in 1915. And I also note here that Gutzon Borglum developed the techniques he would use on Mount Rushmore to blast a 90-foot bas-relief sculpture of Confederate generals into the granite face of a landmark that had once been sacred to the Muskogee people. Walker experienced extreme culture shock that would profoundly influence her artistic vision. From her earliest years, Walker knew that she wanted to be an artist like her father. She earned her BFA from the Atlantic College of Art in 1991 and then enrolled in the Rhode Island School of Design, completing her MFA in 1994. Walker achieved instant notoriety in the art world that same year with her first silhouette mural, Gone, an historical romance of a Civil War as it occurred between the dusky thighs of one young negress and her heart. This installation was Walker's response to Margaret Walker's Gone with the Wind and its lost cause romanticization of the plantation South. The figures she cut from black paper and mounted on the pristine white gallery walls parodied the conventions of silhouette portraiture, as well as the two-dimensional stereotypes of African Americans that blackface minstrelsy popularized in the 19th century. Busily engaged in all manner of grotesque scenes, Walker's silhouettes vividly illustrated the violent realities blackface was intended to erase or overshadow. Walker's next target in the canon of American historical romance novels that shaped national identity was Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. Published in 1950 as a masterful piece of abolitionist propaganda, Stowe's novel was quickly adapted for the stage and became a staple of American drama for the next 100 years. And I talk more about Uncle Tom's Cabin in another chapter of the book. So it had a very powerful impact. Yet, many whites who passionately supported abolition were not prepared to accept Blacks as equal citizens. The popularity of blackface minstrelsy bled into many productions of the Uncle Tom's Cabin play, with minstrel song and dance routines providing comic interludes in the performance. Ironically, Uncle Tom's Cabin therefore became a primary vehicle for fixing blackface caricature in the American popular imagination as an authentic representation of Blackness. Invited to participate in the 1997 Whitney Museum of American Art Biennale, Walker mounted the end of Uncle Tom and the grand allegorical tableau of Eva in heaven. Foreground and center in her silhouette installation was a trail of excrement left by a tambourine-playing pickaninny, Walker's way of defecating on the whole sordid story. In the dialogic imagination, Mikhail Bakhtin identified such scatological performance with the carnivalesque and argued that eruptions of the material lower body stratum are funny because they are consigned to the lower orders of society. Bakhtin links this laughter to the grotesque and argues that the insistence on the lower body makes carnival grotesque a regenerative force because ultimately it always comes down to the reproductive organs and their power to create new life. European popular puppetry traditions all thrive on this type of grotesque humor. Yet the reproductive organs involved in the end of Uncle Tom are all engaged in unspeakable acts of dehumanizing violence. Since the Puritan forefathers frowned on live theater and public revels, only the Gulf Coast territories, originally settled by French and Spanish Catholics, celebrate Carnival and open the kinds of limbic space where joyous laughter at the inversion of social hierarchy can function as a liberating force. Having lost the limbic space of Carnival, inversion of the racial hierarchy is unimaginable in the United States. The violence inherent in the grotesque therefore gets directed against people of color and serves to reimpose the racial status quo. By this time, Walker had purchased a Super 8 camera with the intention of animating her silhouette figures in film. But she did not present her first animated film until 2004. She had, however, bonded with a fellow new mother and willingly cut a series of silhouette shadow puppets for her friend Alva Rogers' 1998 MFA thesis, The Doll Plays. Expanding into the medium of theater and film enhanced the art in motion aesthetics of Walker's work, but also intensified the contradictions within it. And I think there is more in the chapter about Walker's work, but I think I'm going to stop here for questions since we have about 13 minutes left in the session. Thank you all.
Great. Great. And I put a question in the chat. How does one breathe or put breath into an object for performance?
Mhm. So there is the physical level. So if this is my puppet, then it wouldn't just sit here unmoving. We move subtly when we breathe, and those small motions give this sense of life. So
Mhm.
now I have a puppet that's just watching, but it's alive. But it's also an energy transfer
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
the performer is giving some aspect of their own life force into the object itself.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that,
So it's a
that can
life
get really
force. Yeah.
difficult.
Wow.
Mhm.
Yeah. So interesting. It's a spiritual practice, really. I mean, as the graph showed at the beginning too.
Mhm.
There's a lot of overlap in those various realms. Um, who has some questions for Paulette? Maybe our friend Camilla Bryce Laporte, doll maker, an artist, and SSTCI art salon host, and programming chair for us too, African American craft programming chair, all around
Well, whatever.
person who put me in touch with Paulette.
Paulette,
Hi.
you know I'm a big fan. I love your work. This was an excellent presentation. Of course, I want you to hold up your book so people know just how much time do you invest or have you invested in your research? It's quite dense, and this is only chapter 1.
Well, this is like down in the book. It's maybe chapter 12, I think.
Well, right. It's only, I should say, it's only one chapter, right? So it's beautiful work. So how much time did it require for you to do that work?
Okay, so one answer is that this is my pandemic project.
Yeah.
And so it basically took 3 years, and I didn't have much of anything else to do. So I was able to focus.
Right.
But another answer is that my degrees are in French civilization, but I studied the ideology of French colonialism in the Caribbean.
Right.
And I was also in graduate school a TA for the African American Studies program. So I worked with professors who were historians and anthropologists.
Right.
So
Right.
I'm drawing on everything that I learned there, and also through like the 25 years when I was an African American literature instructor. All of that is in the book somewhere.
Right. So your knowledge and proficiency in French literature gave you, I believe, a huge advantage over, even though Francophone countries do this, it's also it's an art form that's spread throughout the Caribbean. You know, Jamaica, Trinidad, and Tobago, all of those have Spanish ancestry as well, but it gives you a decided advantage. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. So some of the most authoritative books on African object performance, dolls and puppets and masks and so forth, are published by French researchers.
Mm-hmm.
So I was able to read those works without having to resort to the dictionary or Google Translate because I'm fluent in French. And there was also material in Spanish and even in Portuguese. I know a little Portuguese because I used to study capoeira, which is Brazilian martial arts. but also because it's a Romance language, it's close to French and Spanish, so I can kind of figure out what's going on in the text. So I drew on all of that in my research as well.
Last question about the Yoruba influence, also the influence of the Dogon in carnival and satirical, the mixture of satirical and medicinal or spiritual. Is that as prevalent in American masquerade and puppetry as you would find maybe in the Caribbean or somewhere else?
In North America, outside of New Orleans, I really didn't find anything that we would call like an African spectacle drama. There's a wonderful researcher named Jerome de Wolf. He reads Dutch and Portuguese, as well as I think Spanish and French, English. So he's great. And he's done research on what he calls the charter generation of Africans, because the first enslaved people to be brought to the United States the Americas in large numbers were from the Congo region.
Right.
And so he calls them the charter generation, and he argues that the social structures that they created after landing in the Americas formed the basis for communities that subsequent waves of enslaved people created on top of that. And one of the notable features of that structure is these brotherhoods, which in Afro-Portuguese society had been based on brotherhoods for the rosary within the Catholic faith that traditionally had processions as part of the religious observance. And that then those became the basis of the different societies that support carnival processions and other processions as part of the Catholic calendar in more Latin America, not so much in North America, although he also links these brotherhoods to Pinksters in what is now the United States. So Pinksters was a Pentecost festival associated with the Dutch colonies. So there were Pinkster celebrations in New York and Pennsylvania and the other regions where the Dutch settled. And one feature of those, of all of these brotherhood celebrations, was that they tended to elect kings, and that the procession day was the day when they elected a new king. So I found another really fascinating article linking these Pinkster celebrations to the Billiken Day parade, the Bud Billiken parade in Chicago, and making this very beautiful connection with that being the place where Barack Obama received the endorsement and was, in a sense, anointed as king.
That's wonderful. How much does your work reflect this research, your own puppetry work? I started, one of my motivations for doing the research is if you go to art school, you have to take a foundations course where you learn the tradition that you're working in. But there wasn't a course like that for me to know what tradition am I working in as an African-American object performer. So I went back and I dug it up and I'm like, okay, now I know what I'm doing. Excellent work. Excellent. I'm sure other people have questions, but really good work. Thank you, Paulette.
I think we have a question from Angela.
Yes, hi, Angela.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. My question was, did you have the chance to interview any of the 4 artists that you featured here today? And actually speak with them or meet with them?
No, those 4 artists were above my rank. They were generous in Faith Ringgold enabled us to use that soft sculpture mask in an exhibit that I co-curated in 2018-19. And the galleries were generous in letting me reproduce images in the book. But those people are very busy, so I did not have
Okay.
the opportunity to speak with them. But I did send them what I was
Okay.
writing, and nobody
Okay.
said, "Oh, that's terrible, get rid of it." So
Okay. That's close enough, I guess.
Mhm.
Thank you. That was my only question.
You're welcome. Yes.
Great. Thank you, Angela. Are there any other questions from anyone else? I actually, while you're thinking, if you have any, you can put them in the chat or just raise your hand. Such a great program presentation, Paulette. I never get enough about the puppetry. I never thought I would like it so much, but it's so interesting. And because we've featured other puppetry artists. Can you talk a little bit about your own artistry? Because you, in addition to being a researcher and author, you're a puppet maker, artist in your own right. So tell us about that a little bit.
Okay, sure. So people are always wondering what's behind me. I'm not sitting in a storage unit. This is my studio. And on either side, there are bins full of props, sets, and costumes. This is the wardrobe department. I come to puppetry from dolls, specifically 1/6 scale fashion dolls, in other words, Barbie and G.I. Joe. I was making videos with my doll figures, and I had collected all of this stuff. This is my MGM backlot, so that I can shoot stories set in any time or place I can imagine without having to have somebody give me millions of dollars to set the scene. And I realized that I was going to get in copyright trouble because those are trademarked characters. So I decided I needed to make my own figures. And once I had shot the first video with figures that I made, I realized, oh, those are puppets. You need to learn something about puppetry. And fortunately, I live in Atlanta. So I started hanging out at the Center for Puppetry Arts. So when I am able to do my own artwork, I make figures to use in short videos. So that's my practice.
Great. Wow. Well, where can we see some of your artwork?
Okay.
On your website?
Yes, on my website. So I'm going to stop this share.
Okay.
And also in Camilla's show, The Calling, the transformative power of African American dolls and puppets, which is currently at the Urban
City Lore
Gallery.
Museum in New York
City Lore Gallery in New York
Right.
City.
And they're only open, I think, on weekends. I was up there just for like a couple days and we were leaving on Friday and it was opening, but we couldn't. I'm gonna try to sneak back up there if I can. Before I know it closes like in early March. Is it?
Mhm.
March 4th. And I know so many of the artists in that, and we also have Dr. Phyllis May Machunda in the house with us here, who was a curatorial expert on the exhibition too, that Camilla curated. Yes, so so you, how many pieces do you have in that show in City Lore?
Just one. It's very big.
A really big one. Oh.
It's a departure from my usual work. Usually I work in 1/6 scale, but
Oh, okay.
that one,
Yeah.
new direction.
Yeah, Silver Spring Town Center does something called tiny house building, and we use paper mache to do it. It's not exactly miniature. I mean, it's not as detailed, and it's making your own. But I tend to buy the miniatures, and I work in like 1 to 12 scale or one, and then it still takes up a lot of space. Oh,
Yeah.
there she is. Wow.
Mhm.
It or he, is it a
She,
woman,
she,
right?
It's Madame Carrefour.
Right. Okay. Wow. And so tell us what the materials are that you use to create her.
Okay, I will zoom in a little. My partner drinks energy drinks all the time and won't recycle the cans. So I recycled some of the cans by cutting them into discs and stringing them together on
Wow.
cords that are braided from strips of
Wow.
plastic bags.
Amazing.
And then the mask is a water jug, and the
Wow.
hair is more strips of plastic bag. And then the necklace and earrings are paper beads, also strung on strips of plastic.
Okay. Wow. I've seen the water jug used for faces and puppetry before. Is where did that,
Mhm.
is that more of a Caribbean practice or in Africa?
I've seen both African and artists in North and Latin America using these recycled found objects as masks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how did you make her hair?
Her hair, I cut the plastic bag into strips and
Oh, it's
then
a plastic.
punched holes in the jug and strung them through. And then it's a
Oh,
braided hairstyle. It's basically cornrows.
I see. Oh, okay. That's really cool. Wow. Wow. I'd like to include that in our newsletter if I can, if you could. Is that
Yeah,
possible to include?
I can
Do
send
you
you
want
an
to send
image.
me an? Okay, great. Oh, how fun. Now I really want to go visit Madame, what's her name?
Carrefour.
Carf-
Carrefour means crossroads.
Carrefour.
She stands at the crossroads of the spirit and the material world. And Camilla asked earlier about Yoruba influence. So in the Yoruba tradition, that crossroads is guarded by the spirit Legba or Gede.
Mhm.
And you can recognize Legba or Gede because in African sculptures, you often see him with cowrie shells for eyes.
Right.
And in the Americas, you will see Legba figures with sunglasses.
Oh,
So that's and then the colors red and black.
is that signifying anything
Yeah, that's the colors of Legba or yeah.
of like that? Okay, great. Wow, it's a wonderful piece of work.
Thank you.
Hopefully I'll get to see her in person if I can make it back up to New York before the show closes March 4th, and people can find out more on City Lore's website, New York City.
Mhm.
Right. Well, any final questions for Paulette before we close? Do you want to tell us about any upcoming projects that you're working on, or just ongoing research and teaching?
I think I can drop a link in the chat if you enjoy
Okay.
Hearing about puppets. I just
Mhm.
came back from the Chicago International Puppet Theater Festival,
Oh, wow.
where I co-curated what we call the Ellen Van Valkenburg Puppetry Symposium series.
Wow.
We did 8 presentations four artist talks with panels of artists who were performing in the festival, and 4 authors who had recently published books about some aspect of puppetry.
Great.
So
And you're based
there
in
were,
Atlanta, right?
yes,
Yeah.
yes. So there were 8 sessions, and
Mhm.
that's the link. If you go to the Howl Round page, you can find all of the videos there. Our theme was the materiality of the puppet, and we had a panel on materials. What are they made of? Mechanisms. What mechanisms do we use to animate them?
Mhm.
Manipulation. What techniques do we use as the performer to bring the puppet to life? And construction techniques. So, are there special processes that we have to put the materials through in order to make the puppet? So, those are the 4 artist talks. And then there are 4 author talks, one of them being about my book. And so, if that's of interest to you, I hope you will enjoy them.
Well, great. Well, I know we have some other folks in the audience who are deeply interested in this subject and African American arts and craft and doll making, puppetry in particular, and fashion design. We have Sehar Pirzada in the audience as well. Anyway, I want to thank you so much, Paulette, for sharing your knowledge and expertise and artistry with us. And please let us know if you're ever going to be coming back to DC. I know you were based here for many years, but we would love to connect in person and, invite you back for another topic,
Okay,
related topic.
thank you so
Great.
much.
Thank you again. And thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you'll join us on Friday for our Around the World Bazaar when we have freed female reenactors of distinction. And I put in the chat, if you want to save the chat now before we close this out, links to register for Black Voices Through Poetry and other events we have during Black History Month, but we also celebrate Black history throughout the year with many programs and with much help from our art salon host and artist doll maker Camila Bryce Support and dear friend Camila. So thank you again, Paulette, and we look forward to connecting with you again soon.
Okay, take care.
Okay.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone. Good night.